welcome back to the show. Today we have Jared Moore from LiquidCharge, CEO and founder. He's going to talk to us about the company, but he's also going to talk to us about his book. And because Nada is off, I guess, hanging out with cool people on spring break, by cool people I mean her kids, we have Camilo Smith here with us to show us how real radio gets done, but also to help co-chair the show. Camilo, do you want to say hi?
How you doing? I'm a longtime Houston journalist. Really glad to be here. Thanks for the invite, Jason.
Cool. And I guess let's talk a little bit about the book, Jared. You said you liked writing it, did not like promoting it.
Well, I loved writing it. I had fun with it. The whole book is told from a vlog perspective, and I kind of made up these characters, and I had this plot and vision, but when I created the characters, that's what gave me the passion to actually write and have fun and just like think about what these guys would say. And it's about three brothers, and I happen to have two older brothers, so it was kind of easy for me to write from that perspective. Yeah.
So it's more of a fictional account then.
Yeah, it's a science fiction book about energy and politics 100 years from now, and basically what happens is these aliens visit Earth, and they see that we're having trouble with global warming, so they offer us a really cheap plant that can be turned into biofuel, and it's called supercorn. Okay. And but these aliens, they want something too. They want $15 trillion worth of uranium. And this is a sci-fi book where economics actually matters. And so coming up with $15 trillion worth for these aliens is very difficult because we have like $100 trillion in debt, and our interest rate's really high. So we have this huge interest payment to pay. So basically, this younger brother who is unemployed, he starts a vlog, and his vlog is basically trying to take down his older brother who's president of the United States. And then the other brother is a famous race car driver. And so that becomes very central to the plot. So I've given away a lot about the book just then, but the ending is not like, nobody has seen the ending yet. Mm-hmm. Like my mom, my brothers, my best friends, colleagues, mentors, none of them saw it coming. So I'll try to leave that cliffhanger out for you guys that you won't see the ending coming. It's only 200 pages.
An easy read.
Yeah, no, it's a great little take. At the beginning, you thank your mom and your dad, and what role did they play in your current journey?
Well, thanks for the question. Well, I had great parents, of course, but they're both teachers, and my dad's an 8th grade science teacher, or he was for 39 years. So he got me interested in sci-fi, and, I'm always trying to be a science communicator, like my dad. So, I just felt like it was appropriate to thank them at the beginning of the book. And to be honest, the move of just having thanks mom and dad, I saw that on somebody else's PhD thesis. So his name's Russell Meyer, but anyway, that was just a quick thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I guess what drove you or inspired you to publish the book now? What was that journey like?
Okay, so during the pandemic, I saw a lot of bad TV. I mean, like what was that show, Tiger King? Like once you watch that, you have no more standards. So I just keep watching all this stuff, and I just thought this is pretty low quality, and I'd like to kind of try my shot at science fiction. And so I had this vision that I had been staring at called thermal hydrogen, which is a big energy vision. And so I just had this really clear vision of what the future might be. And so I just decided I'd create a plot around this vision and help to explain it, but also to have fun. Because my dad's 8th grade science teacher. He wanted me to watch Bill Nye, because it's important to have fun while you're learning. And that's to me kind of what I was trying to do with the book, is like, have some fun reading this, learn a couple of things, and you won't see the ending coming. So, and I had fun writing it, so it's all good.
Bill Nye, the science guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man, that's
Great
a whole
TV
generation
show.
of growing up.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, he's around, but he doesn't have the show anymore.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of these entrepreneurs in the climate tech space, you kind of have a sci-fi kind of mind to come up with some of these ideas. And I'm interested in the kind of the relationship between having to think, in terms of, science fiction, carbon sequestration. Do the two kind of, mix, or do they benefit each other?
No. Well, you're asking really good questions. Yes. And in fact, I was showing people my vision in Washington, D.C. in 2016, 2017, 2018. And some of them even kind of just dismissed me, saying this is science fiction. And I'm like, that's not an insult to me, because science fiction becomes reality over time. I mean, they had iPads and iWatches on Star Trek long before Steve Jobs. So it's easy to envision things. And then once you envision them, it's inspirational. So, that's kind of put the idea in my head to write the sci-fi book. If someone was going to try to insult me and tell me it's a sci-fi, I'm like, well, I might have a little fun with that. Watch me. But then other people would tell me, there's nothing new in this vision. So I just thought, well, if there's nothing new and it's science fiction, well, gee, it might have a good chance of actually happening. So those were the reasons I wrote the book. And, during the pandemic, I had a lot of time to think and be creative. So I figured if I was ever going to check off this, write a novel, if I was ever going to check that off my bucket list, like it was during the pandemic.
It was the time to do it. Did you have to, how did the, creation process go? Did you just kind of write it all in one go? Did you have an editor? How did that happen?
Good question. So I had a couple of false starts where I tried to, I read the book Jurassic Park and I read the book The Martian. And because I just wanted to see, like, this is what it looks like written before it's on the screen. Because to me, the point was to make this into a movie. And I tried to write it from a third person perspective, just like Michael Crichton. And I just couldn't do it. And then I just thought, and it was actually when I was on a plane ride to San Francisco for the accelerator IndieBio for my company, I just thought, why don't I just write this from a vlog perspective? Kind of like they're doing in the book, The Martian. And I actually had a vlog once. It's like my message to the world. So once I put it into this vlog form, and once I made it about three brothers, it just happened spontaneously. I didn't even have to try. I'm sitting around waiting for meetings to happen. I get a couple pages out, then a couple pages out here and there. And then I spend the night reviewing it. And, I hired someone to edit it. But even after they edit it, it took a lot of time to edit it after that. So it kind of took a year to write it and get it published.
Yeah, I just keep thinking, how different is that from creating a company? Is that like getting a company off the ground? What was it like getting your startup?
I'd say it's not as hard as starting a company.
I was gonna say the same number of false starts though sometimes, right?
Well, that's absolutely true. But I guess when you start a company, you need to fundraise, you need to provide a vision for an investor, but you need a partner and you need a co-founder, because no investor just wants to give money to one person and put all their faith in that one person. So the book is very individual, and it doesn't have you don't have board meetings with the book. You don't have to answer to anybody with the book, and so publishing on Amazon is just really easy. You put it up there, and I say that finishing a book is kind of like running a marathon. Even if you get in last place, people will still congratulate you. But that's not the case in business. Your investors will be very, very, very upset with you if you come in last place. And in fact, you'll have to quit. So different kind of challenge, but it does take grit and kind of creativity to get started.
So speaking of the measures of success, so for a company, it's about, creating shareholder value or driving stock price or something like that. When you put out a book into the world, what was your personal measure of success to say, I'm glad I did this?
That's a very good question. Obviously, I wanted to make a little money, and that didn't happen. But I also wanted to make it into a movie, which I think is still out there. In fact, my mentor from ExxonMobil just finished reading it last week, and he texted me. He didn't see the ending coming. He was very surprised by it. He suggested I make it into a movie. So I was just so thrilled to get his feedback because he got all the lessons of the book, and I didn't have to give it away to him. And he didn't see he didn't see the ending coming still. So in my mind, like, I got him.
Yeah.
So I want to do that to more people. And so the success to me is when I hear the feedback from people that say things like, you were fair to both political sides. I didn't see the ending coming. And there was nothing in your book that it was really unrealistic other than the aliens arriving. And that has been very fulfilling to me. And I'm really glad I wrote it just to get the feedback from the people I know who say they got it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to keep going with it. And, I'm thinking another sci-fi plots in my mind, but nothing's really inspired me to this point, but I got a couple of ideas.
Yeah. And I guess that's the point of a book. You're trying to change people's perspective, right?
Right.
And that's the measure that you've given them, that kind of mind shift. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you read it, you'll think you'll know where I'm going, but then you'll be surprised.
Now we're going to have to get the whole thing out.
And that's what makes it hard to promote, because I can't give away the ending, because pretty much everybody wants to see the ending before. But I thought Greetings Lunar Colonists would give away the middle, because an alien comes and says hello. So that's as much as I'll give away.
Okay.
I have a sneaky feeling this is gonna, when the aliens do land, this is gonna be the podcast that they listen to first.
Yeah. It's like, how do we deal with people?
Yeah, the trillion dollars is what grabs me there.
Yeah.
How are we going to come up with that?
15 trillion.
Well,
15 trillion.
And those are the numbers we talk about in the energy transition, right? So it's not that insurmountable when we talk about like 20 or 40 trillion over the next 15 years. It's kind of what we got to do, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I think we're talking about 100 years in the future. So the U.S. economy should be $100 trillion economy.
Yeah.
So, when I was a kid, we used to talk in billions.
Yeah.
Right. Until TARP came along, we never talked in trillions. But after 2008, another trillion here, another trillion there. And people just don't even think about it.
Yeah. I think I saw the new budget that was released was like a $7 trillion budget over 10 years. Like, man, these are numbers.
Yeah.
Almost halfway there.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom.
So let's talk about the company a little bit. LiquidCharge. I know you've taken a few different iterations of that as well. You went through IndieBio, which is one of the best accelerators out there. So you guys can't see Jared's face. We got these chairs in the studio that just sometimes drop you while you're sitting, and he went for a little bit of a roller coaster ride just now.
I'm back.
But no, tell us about kind of what the big insight you've seen around LiquidCharge and what you're trying to build.
Well, kind of my MO, as far as just generally kind of like my view on climate change, is that we need emissions-free liquid fuels. And liquid fuels can be stored densely and piped a long distance for almost no cost. And they, in my opinion, are the perfect complement to the grid to keep the grid well utilized. So if we can keep the grid well utilized, we can electrify more, because electricity will have lower costs. And so my aim with this company, LiquidCharge, is a fuel cell range extender that runs on a liquid fuel, ethanol or methanol. Those are cheaper than hydrogen. And we reform this, feed it to a fuel cell. And then this fuel cell is special because it can handle reformate. And then it takes the hydrogen out of a diluted stream. So it leaves behind pure CO2, which we're going to store on the vehicle in liquid form again. And so it goes right back into the fuel tank, and then that CO2 will eventually get either recycled or sequestered. So I think these liquid fuels are a perfect complement to EVs, so that we don't have to do fast charging. or people that don't want to live their life, from one level 2 charger to another at, grocery stores or wherever, they can just use this fuel cell, and it's just as convenient as going to the gas station, only your vehicle will still be all electric and it'll be emissions free. So that's the insight that I'm after. And yeah, there's been a couple iterations so far though.
Yeah. So I think the piece here is, as much as there's a lot of excitement about hydrogen and other kind of energy carriers, that the reality is hydrocarbons are fantastic at carrying energy and hydrogen around. It's just that pesky CO2, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so instead of trying to define an entire new system to manage just the hydrogen, we're kind of saying, let's take our existing infrastructure and solve the CO2 capture part, which happens at the end. And we already get ethanol, right? Like E85 is already 85% ethanol at the gas station. So you're going to go that extra 15% to make it all ethanol. Why haven't people tried to solve the CO2 problem before? Like what's new or different today that enables us to try to tackle that part of the problem?
Well, I mean, when we first created this energy system 100 years ago, I mean, there were papers written about the greenhouse effect in the late 1800s, but it wasn't really top of mind. Nobody really cared about it until James Hansen in 1988 came to Congress and said this is going to be a huge problem. So CO2 coming out of the smokestack wasn't as much of an issue. But with climate change, it's now an issue. And kind of my big insight is that CO2 capture is as hard as it is dilute. So CO2 in the atmosphere is the hardest. CO2 coming out of a smokestack is like 15%, still pretty hard, but doable. And what comes out of my fuel cell is almost pure CO2. It's already concentrated. And so that's kind of how I think emissions-free liquid fuels can be made cheap, is that it's easy to capture something if it's already concentrated. You just have to change the phase. So once you get the phase change, it's easy to handle. So going back to your original point, Jason, it's much easier to handle pure CO2 in liquid form than it is hydrogen. I mean, every single diner in America has soda. That comes from liquefied CO2. Okay. So it's not hard to handle at all. And it's actually pretty safe. If you had a leak, just, don't breathe in too much CO2. So, I think it's just a much cheaper way to go, but nobody's really thought of that, and myself included, because everybody thinks CO2 bad, so don't create it. And my opinion is CO2 is not bad. Diluted CO2 is what's bad. That's what's going to cost. So, so that's my angle with this global warming problem.
Is there another way you could explain the diluted CO2? Just
sure,
in layman's terms.
Thank you for the question. All right. So when you combust a hydrocarbon, the atmosphere is 80% nitrogen. So the nitrogen doesn't do anything in that combustion reaction. It just passes through. So what comes out of your combustion reaction is water, CO2, and mostly nitrogen. So it's like 85% nitrogen coming out of the smokestack. All right. So if you want to put CO2 underground, you can't capture all that nitrogen and put that underground.
Well, the other issue is you'd have to liquefy the nitrogen, which takes a ton of energy.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So you either have to liquefy all the nitrogen or take it out somehow, and that's what's called carbon capture. So the emissions-free fossil fuel has taken on this acronym called carbon capture and sequestration. All right, carbon capture is the part where you're purifying the CO2 from the stream, and that's the vast majority of the cost. Once we get it liquefied, handling it and taking it to a sequestration site and putting it back underground, that's not a very large cost. So by creating situations with pure CO2, you're getting rid of most of the cost of emissions-free fossil fuels. So that's the reason why this dilution effect is so important. And, we're talking about CO2 in the atmosphere. That's 400. We're measuring it in parts per million, 400 parts per million. So that makes it even more difficult. So that's why we can't just, turn back the clock by just taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, because that's like the most expensive way to get it. So important distinction that took me like 10 years to kind of come around to in my energy career.
So just to like break it down. So you said, okay, you can get at 100% kind of out of your fuel cell tailpipe. If you go to like an emission stack, like a factory, like emission stack or a power plant emission stack, that's 15%. And when you say 400 parts per million, if I'm doing my math right, that's 0.4%.
0.04%.
0.04%.
Yeah.
So you're really doing a ton of work to like sieve out this 0.04% from the 99.96%.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the logic is, let's just do that before it gets hard.
In thermodynamics, there's this there's an amount of work required to separate gases, and it's called the entropy of gas mixing. Okay, so like let's talk about Skittles, for instance. Like if you mixed them all up and told your kid to separate them, they would take them some work, right?
Do they get to eat the ones they separate? Because that might influence their ability to do the work.
I'll leave that up to you, Jason. I don't know any better.
Little Bill Nye energy here.
Yeah, exactly. So if they're already all pre-organized, you don't have to do any work to separate them. So that's like the most basic way to explain this, and how it was explained to me in thermodynamics. So the idea of carbon capture is you got to have something that grabs the CO2, but then you got to have something that releases the CO2. And it takes work to release the CO2 and from like a solvent. And that's the way we're doing it now. We put the solvent into a smokestack, that stuff grabs the CO2, and then we heat up that solvent, and that releases the CO2. So in my fuel cell, we don't have to do this though, because the CO2 is like 80-90%. And when you chill the CO2, that will change the partial pressure of the gas, but we still will have the opportunity to liquefy enough of it to take out the CO2. So it's got to be high concentration so you can just chill it. And because if it's not high concentration, you just try to chill it, all you'll do is change the partial pressure and it won't work.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons why it's got to be such highly concentrated CO2 to reduce the cost.
And the key of the chilling is that you're reducing the volume by like 1,000 times, right?
Yeah.
So that you don't have to carry around a blimp behind you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the other thing that people, damn, you guys ask good questions. All right. That's the other thing that people don't understand about CO2. And what I didn't understand, 15 years ago, when I first heard about it, I thought, what are these guys doing? They're just shoving gas into a cave? Like, that's not going to work. But you take CO2 gas, you liquefy it, it becomes like 500 times smaller, and then you can pump it just like any other liquid. And when you pump it underground, it's taking up just a fraction of the space. And we have all this space underground because we've been drilling for so long. So nobody asked about that vacuum that was left. Well, we can fill that with CO2. And you can also put CO2 in saline. I think someone, if I'm not, Ken Caldera did a calculation, and he said the CO2 in the atmosphere, if you liquefied it, it would only be like less than an inch or something like that. Like
around the earth.
Yeah. Like it would just be like this really, really small layer. So when you think about, it's only 400 parts per million and it's liquefied, which makes it 500 times smaller. Like it's just really not that much volume when you liquefy it. So I appreciate you. And I guess the other way to say that is we're reverse drilling with the CO2. That's another like layman's term to kind of explain the sequestration phenomenon.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense if you think about it. Like all the hydrocarbon came from down there. You're pulling it up. There should be the same amount of room to put more liquefied carbon back. Now, especially now that you've stripped out all the hydrogen and other stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That comes up with it. So.
Yeah, and after we're done with all the oil and gas wells or saline aquifers, and after we're done with that in like thousands of years, there's ocean space. So. We got enough CO2 space. Like it's going to be our grandchildren's problem to what happens after we run out of CO2 space.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm really curious, because there are a lot of range extender for CVs. I'm sorry, am I saying that right? There's a lot of entrepreneurs working on startups that are looking at CO2 sequestration, range extending of EVs. So what is sort of the, how do you sort of get above what's already out there? What's your main selling point for what differentiates LiquidCharge from a lot of the others right now?
All right, thanks for the question. So I think the only thing that really is competitive with, our marginal cost would be at-home charging.
Mm-hmm.
So that's available at like 15 cents a kilowatt hour, maybe a lot more in California, but nevertheless, it's very convenient. You're just at-home charging. You're going to work, you come back home, you charge there. We can't compete with that.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to pretty much anything else, we're very competitive because the fuel is so cheap to distribute. And unlike engines, we're using this in a fuel cell. So engines are inefficient. They have to be. And fuel cells also have waste heat, but they're not nearly as inefficient. So this is a huge step up as far as efficiency, which means we're going to have a much lower marginal cost than any petroleum-based engine because our fuel cost is similar, but we're more efficient. All right, so that's competing with our carbon infrastructure. But when it comes to future technologies like fast charging, that takes up the cost of your charging by like 2 to 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
So people who advocate for EVs, they really don't like to talk about that part. And only 50% of people have access to overnight charging. So it's going to be a huge problem that half of people are going to have to depend on charging that's 2 to 4 times as much. Okay. The other options that are out there, hydrogen costs a lot to distribute, even if you get the cost down. In Texas, we have hydrogen available for $1 a kilogram already, but still distributing that to a gas station and selling it to people would be quite expensive, way more expensive than ethanol is right now. So that's the only thing out there that's, running on molecules that gets the same efficiency as us, but it's going to cost probably twice, at least 50% more, but probably twice as much in the long run as opposed to the ethanol or methanol fuels. So that's our competitive edge versus everybody else. And as far as home charging is concerned, since we're just doing a range extender, you can charge at home if you want to as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a range extender. So that's why I can't look away. I think I'm very competitive across the board.
So, how do people buy the LiquidCharge system? Is it something you attach to the back of your Tesla? I know you were looking at buses at one point as well.
No, we're still starting with the larger vehicles, just because it is hard the hardest market to compete in is light duty vehicles. So that's my ultimate dream, is to make it to light duty vehicles, but we're starting with large vehicles and large fleets because those are the most charging intense applications. And so, more charging intense applications means more expensive electricity. So that's where we can compete.
What's a charging intense application? Just to explain.
Something that you're going to require a lot of power every day. Like a bus goes 18 hours, and it is an enormous vehicle, and then it has 6 hours to charge overnight before it starts it all over again. Like that's charging intense. You're going to have to do a megawatt hour of charging over 6 hours. And then you're going to have 50 buses arrive in the same location to do that. Like it only takes a handful of fast chargers to really overwhelm a grid. Like 2 Teslas fast charging in a parking lot take up as much electricity as the Walmart does. Just one fast charging gas station takes up about as much power as a small town, like 10,000 people. So we're talking about enormous amounts of power that are going to be expensive to install and then difficult to utilize well, because you only have 6 hours to charge. So you can't have a 50% utilization rate if you only have 6 hours a day to charge.
So to put this in perspective, a megawatt is what? It's like 750 horsepower. Am I doing my math right? And so that's the equivalent. I might be going the other way. It might be 1,000 horsepower, 1,300 horsepower. Jared's gonna go check my math. I think it's 750 watts per horsepower is the way it goes.
Okay, Google. How many
He's
horsepower
gonna spot check me right
is
here.
1,000 megawatts?
What are we coming out to?
1.3 million
Okay, so it's 100
horsepower.
Okay, I think you said 1,000 megawatts. Okay, so a megawatt. What you articulated before is right. You got to charge this thing with a megawatt charger for about 6 hours to make up for 18 hours of work. And put it in perspective, it's kind of like you're going and putting power into this thing with like a 1,300 horsepower engine, right? Like
Yeah.
going. When really like the duty cycle is such that you need like a 3 to 400 horsepower system while it's running. Right. And so which is the size of the engine that's in the buses today is kind of what I'm going at. And so because you're concentrating the charging time essentially overnight over a short period, it's kind of the same net power going out throughout the day. But it's that concentrated time of charging that really puts the strain on the grid. When you're putting fuel in a system, you fill the thing up in like 30 minutes. That's a lot of power you're actually dumping into the fuel tank.
Yeah.
Realistically, and that's what makes a range charger really effective, because you can feed that 200, 300 horse back kind of as needed.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to fill it up in this short time, right?
Yeah. So
that was a long analogy to get to where we're at.
We might have to cut a little bit out
That's
there,
fine.
but let me try to kind of put some numbers around what you just said. I meant to say you need a megawatt hour of energy.
Yep.
And you have 6 hours to charge that. So on average, that would be a charging rate of 166 kilowatts, which is probably something closer to 200 horsepower. And so, what you were saying is exactly right, Jason. You've got this kind of large distribution of electrical power that cannot be utilized very often. So that's going to make it necessarily expensive. And what people take for granted is like your home uses like 1 to 10 kilowatts. But when you fill up your car at the gas station, we're talking speeds above 1 megawatt with that liquid going into your car. People don't appreciate that huge power. And like I was saying at the beginning of this podcast, storage, piping, and distribution are almost free. I mean, those are 19th century technologies when it comes to liquids. So it's extremely fast and effective, unlike fast charging. So that's the big advantage, in my opinion, why Thomas Edison lost, why we're driving internal combustion engines.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious. Could we just take it back to the beginning of like what's your background in this?
Sure.
and where did you learn to keep all these big numbers in your head?
And my backstory is I really got into energy because of 9/11. And when I grew up, in the 90s, there was a lot of war movies, and my dad narrowly missed the Vietnam draft, and some of his friends did not. So I was very conscious of the military growing up. And then 9/11 happened, and then I just became obsessed with energy. And then that kind of grew into an obsession with climate change. Once that started becoming more known in the 2000s, like Al Gore's movie got my attention. I'm not going to tell you like I agree with everything you said, but he got my attention. And so after that, I just thought, wow, our national security depends on us not using oil, and our economy or its health depends on us not emitting CO2 into the atmosphere. Like we have huge changes that we need to make. So that's why I went into mechanical engineering. That's why I took a job developing solar power in California after I graduated. And then after that, I went back to grad school to get a PhD in engineering and public policy. And then after that, I moved to Washington, D.C. to be a consultant. And then when I was consulting for these clients, they always want to know what's next. And I didn't know what to tell them. So that's why I got into hydrogen so much. And then I just kind of went my own direction.
That's a great through line.
Because it got way too technical. Like people in Washington, D.C. tell me, if it doesn't fit on a 3x5 card written in huge Sharpie marker, don't even try to get it across. Don't even try to share that.
It's got to fit the soundbite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, they talk to a lot of people every day. I'm not saying I could keep that up. So you got to keep a simple message for them. And they're not ready for hydrogen, let alone all of my ideas about hydrogen.
Yeah, so instead of keeping it on a 3x5 card, you wrote a book. So I'm not
Exactly.
sure you picked the
Have a
lesson.
little fun. Exactly.
But tell us about the kind of fundraising journey that's taken you from, I think you said you were in DC. You didn't start the business in DC. And then you went to IndieBio, which is in California, if I remember. And then you came to Houston. So tell us about that journey.
Well, I was trying to advocate for thermal hydrogen like 2018, 2019.
What is thermal hydrogen?
It's a broader vision for emissions-free liquid fuels. Okay. If you Google it, you can read the papers. But I figured out that was going to be an impossible task, and I need to focus on one thing. So I said this fuel cell range extender is a great place to start. Because actually I had coffee with Jigger Shaw, who told me, you need to look at using the ethanol. It's already out there. And so that got me down the ethanol track. So I had a lot of trouble raising money. And then out of nowhere in late 2021, IndieBio gave me an offer. I thought it was fake. I literally didn't believe this was a real thing until I got into the virtual accelerator and saw everybody else online. Because I had never heard of them, and they reached out to me. So I got this funding through IndieBio. I had a co-founder. We went through the accelerator in San Francisco. It was virtual. Omicron interrupted our accelerator big time. And so we graduated, got that funding. And then unfortunately, my co-founder decided to quit. But it was actually kind of a blessing because I brought him in to be a solid oxide fuel cell expert. And now we're not using solid oxide fuel cells anymore. We're going to try high temperature PEM fuel cells. And the other reason it was a blessing for him to quit is because it gave me opportunity to apply to Greentown Labs. So, I mean, just as soon as this guy quit, I applied to Greentown Labs before the day was over.
I do remember that. I was like, are you serious?
Yeah. And yeah, because I applied once and I didn't make it. So I thought, I got a much better application this year. I'll try again. And I want to move the company down to Houston. It's a CO2 sequestration company, so nobody knows more about that than people down here in Houston. And I also wanted to come down here and recruit out of this, extraordinary, talented engineering pool, and that's worked out well. I've got a new co-founder. Used to work for Shell. He's been down here in Texas since the late 70s. He's got a PhD from A&M. So I think I got myself a good co-founder. So far I've been very pleased with Houston.
I'm wondering about the if you could break down a little bit about the high temperature PEM fuel cell that you mentioned.
How is that different from an SOFC?
All right.
Yeah.
Good question again, guys. All right. Solid oxide fuel cell is a ceramic fuel cell, and it operates at a temperature of 900 degrees Celsius. Okay, so what I was so attracted to about this fuel cell is that it actually filters pure oxygen. So that's the carbon capture phenomenon we were talking about before, because if you filter pure oxygen, then you are not allowing nitrogen to get into the reactants. So that means you're creating pure CO2. All right, so the problem with solid oxide fuel cells, though, is that they're ceramic. They're extremely brittle, so they're not really ready yet for the mobile application. I mean, some people are making stronger fuel cells, but they're not quite ready. And the other problem is you can't really do roll-to-roll processing with them. And so the proton exchange membrane fuel cells can do roll-to-roll processing. And that's what makes batteries so cheap, is that you just have a roll and you cut it, and that's your fuel cell. Okay, and that's whatever
so you
cell
get so much higher
need.
volume
Yeah,
production.
much higher volumes,
okay.
Lower costs. Can't do that with a solid oxide fuel cell. So I discovered what a high temperature PEM fuel cell was as opposed to a low temperature PEM. So low temperature PEM is what everybody else is using. It's lower than 100 degrees Celsius, and it can only handle pure hydrogen. So that's the reason we're not using it, is because we got to feed reformate into this fuel cell.
And what's a reformate?
Reformate is what comes out of your reforming process. And that means when we're reforming ethanol into hydrogen and CO2, there's a lot of things that are also coming out that aren't hydrogen and CO2. And a low temperature PEM fuel cell can't even handle that CO2.
But so let's take a step back. So you got a process that sits in front of the fuel cell called a reformer.
Yes.
I assume, or a machine that does that. And what, you put the ethanol in and then you heat it up?
Yeah, do a partial oxidation process over a catalyst, and that reforms it into hydrogen and CO2. It's not perfect. So
and then that feeds into
that goes
your
into the
PEM.
fuel cell.
Okay.
Yeah. And so we can't use a low temperature PEM fuel cell because of that, because it's, the reforming's imperfect. Plus you have all that CO2. So this high temperature PEM fuel cell can handle the reforming, can handle the CO2, methane, all kinds of other stuff. Basically, what's not sulfur, it can handle. And what is really great about this fuel cell is that at the same time, it's removing hydrogen from the stream. So it goes from mostly hydrogen to mostly CO2. So we've got our concentration problem solved. And then, like, the icing on the cake with the high temperature PEM fuel cell, it operates at almost 200 degrees Celsius.
Oh, so hot. I thought you were going to say much hotter.
No, but still 200 degrees Celsius is good.
Yeah.
It's a lot better than 80.
Yep.
So that means your heat exchange is going to be a lot more effective because there's a greater temperature difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that also means we can use the heat to do something, which we use it for an ammonia-based chiller, which is what chills our CO2 into a liquid. So that waste heat actually gets turned into very cold temperature, negative 30 degrees Celsius, with an efficiency of like 25%. So pretty terrible, but it's free heat. So, it's just a bunch of heat exchangers, no compressors. So less pneumatic work.
Yeah. And so who do you source the fuel cells from? Somebody else, or is that, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, our plan right now is to outsource the fuel cell production. High temperature PEM, it's having a moment right now. Zero Via just got named like one of the top companies out there. I forgot who published that list. Sorry, I forgot. But
so what are some notable PEM suppliers? So you said Zero Via is one.
Well, they're a company that's using high temperature PEM. Advent is another company that's manufacturing it, but all of these patents come out of BASF.
Oh, okay.
So there's been some big companies, and basically, though, what's happening is it hasn't scaled up yet, but it's a lot of the same chemistry as low temperature PEM. So the supply chain is all right there, which is what got me so excited. Because when my old co-founder quit and I looked into solid oxide fuel cells, I'm like, oh my God, this is supply. Like, nobody even wants to talk to me. People are talking me out of this. That's like the worst thing I could ever have happen. So, but when it comes to low temperature PEM, people's attitude, or high temperature and people's attitudes are, I can build you a manufacturing plant. We have the patents, we have the materials, we have the experience. We can do that. All we have to do is scale it up. So that's what really convinced me that this is the way to go. It's not as efficient, but it's so much easier, and it's going to cost a lot less.
So to anchor this in what people know, what is a Bloom box?
Okay, so Bloom is a company that it's kind of a pioneer, solid oxide fuel cells.
So they're SOCs, okay.
Yeah, and that's stationary distributed power for like data centers.
Very different, but and that's part of why it can work is it doesn't move, so it doesn't have to deal with like the vibration of mobility.
That's exactly right.
Got it.
That's exactly right.
Okay. How's been the fundraising trip?
Abysmal.
Why? Well, tell us about why it's been abysmal. Down here. Yeah.
Mainly because what I'm doing is really out of step with the mainstream, and just about nobody has ever accused me of not having an original idea. They're all saying like, nobody else is doing this, Jared. Why are you doing this? Nobody's talking about ethanol. Nobody wants to do, well, some people want to do fuel cells, but not very many. But nobody else wants to do mobile carbon capture other than Saudi Aramco. So that makes them very uncomfortable. Plus, there's all these subsidies for fast charging and for hydrogen. And so that's really, nobody wants to fight the government. It's hard enough, and you have to fight the government on top of that. Plus, right now we're looking at 6% interest rates, which makes it really, really hard for an early stage company. So the ironic thing about that is when I started this book, interest rates were at 1%. And I thought, how high can I make interest rates and be realistic? And I thought 8% was the highest I could go. We're already at 6%.
Yep. Yep. So it's not fully science fiction, right?
Yeah, which is the other reason why I'm like, I got to get this book out. Like, I was right.
When you mentioned mobile, was it mobile carbon sequestration?
Mobile carbon capture.
Mobile carbon capture. Did you explain that earlier? Because I think I might have missed that.
No.
Yeah. What happens to it after you've captured it, essentially, right?
Yeah, because you're saying that's what differentiates other forms, but
Yeah,
because I'm visualizing what this mobile thing is. It's what is this?
Well, mobile carbon capture is kind of a phrase that I think Saudi Aramco came up with because they were doing carbon capture on diesel trucks, and a company called Remora is now doing this. And they basically just capture the CO2 off the stack and carry around the CO2 and then sequester, take it to a gas station for eventual sequestration. So I'm doing that, but I don't have the carbon capture process per se because, I'm creating the CO2 in pure form. But, they're Saudi Aramco has kind of been pioneering this idea that you could exchange CO2 at a gas station. Mm-hmm. So there's, if you look up the phrase mobile carbon capture in Aramco, like you can see the work that they've done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I guess it should be strategic for traditional energy companies to look at this because, it enables them to continue producing, oil, which they produce, but solves a big key challenge in the value chain of like, how do we actually capture the carbon? And so for you, like the storage is on the vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. What happens to that storage when it gets full? Let's start there.
Okay. Yeah. So the CO2 goes back into the gas tank, basically. The gas tank has a separator, mm-hmm. and the separator moves like a piston cylinder. So as the fuel is used, the CO2 backfills the empty space. All right. So from there, this liquid CO2, you hook up an extra gas hose at the gas station. It goes into the CO2 storage from there. And then from there, the CO2 will go via an 18-wheeler to either a market opportunity or sequestration. So, CO2 infrastructure, is like a $10 billion industry right now, mainly for, various uses of CO2 like soda. So that's already built out, but the issue is going to be getting the CO2 to a sequestration opportunity. Mm-hmm. You can find that in Texas, but a lot of other places, we don't have CO2 pipelines. So that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but there's also a huge market for CO2. So we can sell to that for the time being.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I assume you empty the CO2 every time you fuel up. That's kind of the ratio of storage you need.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. The CO2 is a little bit larger than the ethanol, but only marginally so.
Mm-hmm. You just design that into the tank.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Do you have more?
I was interested in this question right here.
Go for it.
The success of your startup. What sort of, because I know, when you're applying to a place like Greentown, you have to talk about how you're going to scale up and sort of what are the challenges to scaling what you're working on.
I'd say the challenge is getting people out of the electrify everything mindset. I mean, I'm electrifying the drivetrain, but we're using a liquid fuel. And I think that people really associate any liquid fuel with fossil fuels. And so, they just kind of dismiss it right then. And I just think, I think if you had a room full of engineers and you said, hey, would you rather build CO2 recollection stations or fast chargers? I think they'd all choose the CO2. But that's really not something where people have their mindset right now. So I have to get over that. I have to scale up this high temperature PEM, which I'm getting help doing. I mean, there's other people looking at that. But then basically, we need to get serious about sequestering CO2. It's still too difficult. I feel like in 2024, we should have been much further along by now, because it doesn't matter where you are in the political spectrum. We need to sequester CO2 that's already in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So we need to make this easy to do if we want people to do it. So to me, that's the biggest challenge, other than just how hard it is to balance your books when it comes to running a company. I mean, that's hard too. But the big grand challenge is just getting people out of the mindset of electrify everything and then getting them on board with sequestering CO2. To me, those are the two biggest roadblocks.
Well, we're coming up a little bit on time, so I want to talk a little bit about Houston. Now that you're here, how did you find the Houston innovation ecosystem? You've been here for what, 18 months now?
Yeah, I've been here for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
I have been so impressed.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Greentown Labs.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the Ion.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like what you're doing, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're hustling your ass off.
Yeah.
You're creating, another ecosystem. And I just feel like Houston has a can-do attitude, and it's really refreshing because in Washington, D.C., it's easy to get negative. And the prices right down here, people like businesses, people like engineering, this is like the biggest concentration of chemical engineers in the world. So I just been so impressed that everybody is so encouraging and wants to build something. This is a hard tech town. This ain't San Francisco. All right. And it's not Washington, D.C. And as an engineer, I am really loving it. And I also I just love how easy it is to live in Houston. And also the food's unbelievable. So I'm going to stay. And for other reasons too.
I like that, the hard tech town. All right.
Yeah. I want to know what food you're seeking out while you're here. What's the best?
Well, that's a funny story. I love the Tex-Mex, but you can get anything. And I love that Tex-Mex is mixed with a lot of things. But to be honest with you, I've become obsessed with grilling because I have a backyard now. And the weather allows you to grill year round around here. So I'm going to Costco and freezing meat and I'm grilling all the time. Yeah. I'm loving that.
His next book is going to be a cookbook on grilling. I can feel it. That's what's going to be.
Sci-fi grilling. I like that.
Sci-fi grilling.
Please keep that. Keep that. But I'm curious, where are you from though? Where do you claim is your background?
Yeah. Born and raised in Indiana, Indianapolis, and I went to college in Indiana too. So I didn't leave Indiana until I moved to California in 2004.
I figured it was Midwest because you said soda.
As opposed to pop or?
Pop. Cola. I don't know. Okay. I'm from New Jersey, so we call it something different. But soda, I feel is.
Actually, in the Midwest, people say pop.
Do they say pop?
Yeah, and I consciously had to purposely get out of that and say soda.
Okay,
to be
you're
more
right.
accessible.
Yeah. That was the switch.
Had to hide my Midwestern accent there.
What do you call a water fountain? Let's go with
water fountain.
No, not a bubbler.
No, I've never heard of bubbler. What's a bubbler? A bubbler?
Yeah. I think that's technically a Southern thing, but who knows?
I never heard of that.
So before we got on the show, you were talking about looking for a jiu-jitsu gym. Is that are there some hidden gems around Houston that people should know about?
Man, I wouldn't know. I'm looking for my brother.
Yeah,
my brother is a retired mixed martial artist. Still does jiu-jitsu
as well.
Yeah, so he's coming to Houston next month. And so I was asking Colin, can you get my brother into a gym around here?
Okay.
And then we discussed whether I would do it. And my brother said, if you're only going to do it one time, don't do it. Just get your ass kicked.
Yep.
So don't do it.
Okay. So we don't have one of those yet for the audience.
No.
When you think about the Houston ecosystem, are there any gaps that you wish were filled?
Well, I kind of wish the Austin financial excitement would move to Houston.
Meaning like the venture capital excitement?
Yeah, the venture capital scene. That's mainly present in San Francisco and New York, and to a lesser extent maybe Miami. But I'd like to see capital come here. I'd like to see more VCs in Houston, and I mean, it kind of seems like that's going to happen, right? I mean, Elon Musk is putting his money in Texas, so
yep,
might happen.
Okay. I guess as we wind up, is there anything that the audience can do to support you in your goals? Question number one is, where do they find your book, I guess?
Book's available on Amazon. Just punch in Greetings Lunar Colonist and you'll find it. And if you are interested in startups and kind of fuel cells and liquid fuels, CO2 sequestration, I'm not hard to find. And I think, if you just are interested in energy and don't want to read something too technical, maybe a little fun, maybe even funny, my book would be a good place to start.
Cool. And where can they find you on the internet?
My Twitter handle is Jared, JARED _TH2.
TH2. Okay.
Yeah. And full name's Jared Moore. So you can find me on LinkedIn as well.
All right. Cool. Well, thanks for being with us.
Well, thank you guys for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Likewise.